My mill publicly humiliated my dad for being a construction worker, then her hidden gold digger past was exposed at our anniversary party. I, 26F, have been married to my husband Eric, 28M, for 14 months, and we've been together for 3 years total including our year of marriage. We have a good relationship overall, but the one person who has always had an issue with us being together is his mother, Vivian, 54F. She made this crystal clear at our anniversary party last week by humiliating my dad in front of everyone, but she got her karma almost immediately when her carefully guarded past was exposed. Now she's trying to make me feel bad about it. Some background: both Eric and I come from immigrant families, but our backgrounds are very different financially. When Eric first introduced me to his mother, I foolishly thought our shared immigrant heritage would create a bond between us. I was completely wrong. She instantly disliked me, and it got even worse after she found out my dad used to work in construction. My grandfather suffered a fatal heart attack during my dad's junior year of high school. My grandmother had been a stay-at-home mom until then, but after his death, she had to find work. My dad also had to start working because they wouldn't have survived otherwise. My grandfather had been a low-level employee at a small company, so they didn't have much savings, and what little they had quickly dwindled even with both of them working. My grandmother never had formal education, so she could only get odd jobs that barely paid anything. After graduating high school, my dad gave up on college and started working in construction. He worked there for years, supported his mother, saved every penny he could, and lived extremely frugally. That's where he met my mom, whose parents were also Malaysian immigrants but in a somewhat better financial position. She had been hired as an administrative assistant at the same construction company. They started dating and were married within 2 years. They eventually quit their jobs and opened a bakery together. Shortly after they opened, my mom found out she was pregnant with me. Even after starting their business, they struggled financially until I was about 11 or 12, when things finally started improving. The bakery began doing well, and now I'm 26 with a business degree, helping my parents run it while they prepare for retirement. I'm incredibly proud of what they've accomplished. Eric's grandparents had a very different experience. When they immigrated, they already had money and connections. They were able to set up their business relatively easily. Their struggles were more related to discrimination rather than finances. Eric's mother has always lived comfortably, and it got even better after she married Eric's father, Robert, 56M, who came from a family of successful business owners and inherited a flourishing construction company. Vivian worked briefly after getting married but quit when she became pregnant with Eric. She's been a stay-at-home mom ever since. I know she loves Eric more than anything, and I expected her to extend that love to me since her son loves me, but that never happened. For the past 3 years, she's taken every opportunity to belittle me and remind me of my lower-class background, making it clear that although we both come from immigrant families, we couldn't be more different in her eyes. It's always been obvious that as long as she's around, I'll never fit in with Eric's family because my parents aren't in the same financial bracket as them. Her attitude toward me is bizarre. She seems to hold my dad's construction background against me as if it's something shameful. My dad doesn't even work in construction anymore. He runs his own successful bakery business now. While he's not extremely wealthy, he's doing well, and I'm proud of everything he and my mom have accomplished. When I first started dating Eric, I used to feel bad about how his mother treated me. Eventually, I stopped paying attention to her comments. I never responded to her nasty remarks, but Eric always stood up for me, which seemed to upset her even more. I could have easily told Eric I didn't want her in our lives, and we could have cut her off permanently, but I chose not to. The only reason I tolerated her involvement in our lives was because of Robert, who is actually a decent person. Every time we meet, he apologizes afterward because he notices how badly Vivian treats me. I know that cutting Vivian off would make things very difficult for Eric and his father, so I've never pushed for that. But at our anniversary party earlier this week, I think everyone had finally had enough, and Robert himself decided to stand up for me when Vivian crossed the line. To celebrate our first year of marriage, Eric and I invited both our families, including extended family and many friends. We rented a nice venue and went all out. Everything was going well until midway through the party when Vivian decided to make some cutting remarks about my dad for absolutely no reason. When someone noticed a bathroom faucet leaking, she loudly announced that my dad should fix it since he was used to that sort of work and it should feel just like old times. It was already insulting, but then she took it to another level. Speaking loudly enough for everyone around her to hear, she told my dad that since the party was wrapping up, he should start handling the plumbing issues so we could leave the place in good condition to maintain his reputation. My parents were too shocked to respond, and I was absolutely furious. I confronted Vivian, telling her enough was enough, but she snapped at me and started screaming in my face. She said gold digging wouldn't change the kind of family I was born into and that I would always remain working class trash. She regretted letting her son marry me. I could smell alcohol on her breath, so I knew she was drunk, but it was still incredibly embarrassing. I was about to fight back when Robert intervened, holding Vivian back from getting any closer to me. Then he started yelling at her, threatening to tell everyone exactly how and where he had met her. From the expression on her face, I could tell this wasn't something she wanted people to know. I decided that since she had made it a point to humiliate my father in front of so many people, it was only fair for the same thing to happen to her. I told Robert that the only reason Eric and I hadn't cut Vivian out of our lives was for his sake, because we didn't want drama. But now that so many lines had been crossed, the least he could do was stand up for what was right. He seemed to understand what I was hinting at, and even as Vivian was trying to stop him, he started telling everyone the real story behind how they met before their marriage. As I mentioned earlier, Vivian had never had to struggle financially like my parents, and that was something she prided herself on, even though she personally had nothing to do with it. It had been her parents and grandparents who provided her comfortable life. However, before she started dating Robert, her father had developed a gambling problem out of sheer overconfidence and ended up losing a lot of money. He was in debt and on the verge of selling his construction company. Her father started reaching out to business associates for help, one of whom happened to be Robert's father. Long story short, that's how Vivian and Robert ended up together. Robert's father bought out Vivian's father's company to prevent it from going under and helped clear all his debt. But from then on, her father was no longer an independent businessman, he had to report to Robert's father and work under him. Even Vivian had to work under them briefly, but fortunately for her, Robert really liked her and asked her out, which eventually led to their marriage. By announcing this in front of everyone, Robert reminded Vivian that she wasn't superior to anyone else. The only reason she had money now was because her husband earned it, and the reason she had a comfortable life before was because her father and grandfather had worked hard. And when they failed, her father-in-law had rescued their family from financial ruin. Robert pointed out that she had no right to make fun of me or try to humiliate my parents when her own story wasn't impressive either. After he finished, most of his relatives were gasping in shock. It wasn't that her past was shameful, it's just that she had always pretended she was above everyone else because she'd married into an upper-class family and supposedly came from one herself. She had taken so much pride in this, and now everyone knew it was just a facade. I was relieved that the truth was finally out. She'd always acted so rich and snobby, like I was beneath her, but in reality, at least my parents were hardworking and honest. They accomplished everything on their own, whereas her family had to rely on someone else's rescue. I might not be from an upper-class family like she claimed to be, but I'm also not the daughter of a gambler who wasted everything he had. Vivian realized that now that her story was out, people would never look at her the same way again, and that was entirely her fault. She ran out of the venue in tears, and nobody went after her. We just served dinner after that, though the mood had been effectively ruined, and then everyone went home. Eric and I were both surprised about what we had learned that day, because even Eric hadn't known this about his mother. It made her behavior all the more disgusting, because she knew that if not for her husband and his family's help, her own family probably wouldn't have survived either. She should have been compassionate toward me, but instead, she had been nothing but cruel. Now she expects me to be compassionate toward her and apologize for egging Robert on that day and forcing him to tell everyone her story that she had kept secret for so long. She texted me saying she expected me to apologize publicly. Not only that, but she also demanded that Eric, Robert, and I acknowledge that what was said that day shouldn't have been said in public, and that we're all ashamed of our behavior because we used her past against her in retaliation for just a couple of jokes she made at my father's expense. I'm not even exaggerating, this is exactly what she sent me a couple of days after the incident. When I didn't respond within 24 hours, she sent another message saying I owed this to her because the way she was humiliated was far worse than what she had done. According to her logic, everyone already knew my father used to work in construction, so it wasn't a big secret, and I didn't have many extended family members at the party, just a cousin and an aunt who had recently moved here for work. But she had lots of family members attending who had no idea about her father's gambling and financial troubles. Plus, her husband's family was there, who would now definitely judge her and look down on her because she was indebted to them. I don't understand how she concluded people would judge her, but even if they do, it's her own fault because she's always done the same to others. Anyway, she expects me to apologize, and I've already spoken to Eric about it. He doesn't think it's necessary at all. In fact, he believes it's better for us to cut her out of our lives altogether. We're on the same page, but Robert is extremely torn up right now. Robert believes we should just do whatever Vivian asks because after the party, she didn't go back home, she's been staying at a hotel and refusing to even talk to him unless we do what she demanded. Robert really regrets what happened at the party. He says he lost his temper and ended up humiliating her. Even though he still doesn't think Vivian's treatment of me was fair, he thinks he went too far and wants to fix his relationship with his wife before it's too late. So he's been begging us to do whatever she asks, along with him, just so she'll come back. This is the dilemma Eric and I have been facing. Robert clearly isn't ready to give up on his marriage, and Vivian won't come back until we apologize. But apologizing to her isn't something either of us thinks is appropriate because we don't believe we're at fault. She did this to herself, and if anything, she should be apologizing to us, not even to Eric, but at least to me and my dad. On the other hand, I feel bad for Robert because he clearly loves his wife and isn't ready to lose her, and he did take a stand for us at the party. I would feel terrible if he ended up losing his wife because of us, especially after he stood up for us. I'm just really confused right now. Ida for not wanting to apologize to my mother-in-law even though it might cost my father-in-law his marriage? Update 1. Hi everyone. It's been almost 2 weeks since the incident, and Eric and I have decided that we absolutely will not apologize to Vivian. We thought about everything for a really long time, and we're standing firm. His mother still hasn't gone back home. Robert has kept begging and pleading with us to just do whatever she says, but we refuse. Robert posted a public apology on social media by himself, but since our names weren't attached to it, Vivian hasn't responded. She's only damaging her own marriage at this point, nothing else, because Eric and I definitely don't care whether she comes back home to her husband or not. That's not our concern, especially since she was never worried about how it would look for the family when she insulted me and my dad in public. Honestly, what happened at the party was too little, too late. I should have taken a stand for myself long before any of this happened. Maybe then she never would have dared to cross me and my family. Before this, she had only made remarks when I was around but behaved normally in front of my parents or in public settings. I guess at the party she got too drunk and couldn't hold back, but that's her problem to deal with, not mine. Regardless, I should have stood up to her and pushed back a long time ago, before any of this started. Also, while I'm grateful to Robert for standing up for us, that's not enough. Even before this, he had done the same thing we had been doing, tolerating his wife's behavior. He made it clear to us that he didn't approve of it, but he never did anything to stop it either. So while I'm thankful, I don't have to bow down to his wife and make myself smaller just for their marriage to work. I'm done trying to avoid drama just to keep things peaceful with Vivian. She definitely doesn't deserve it. If Robert wants to continue trying to appease her, he can, but Eric and I have made it very clear to him that we want no part in it. What happened on the day of the party was the last straw for all of us, but so far, Robert hasn't accepted our decision and keeps trying to change our minds. He texts us every day saying he really needs our help because his wife won't come back unless we apologize too. He's even told us we don't need to mean the apology, we just need to say the words. But Eric and I aren't willing to do even that because it would look bad for all of us, and I really can't understand why Robert doesn't get that. After what happened at the party, it's obvious I'm not going to apologize to Vivian. What I find even weirder is that Robert keeps trying to make us feel guilty by bringing up the fact that he stood up for us at the party, and now it's our turn to return the favor or something. I had mentioned this in my original post as well. I had thought about helping him out because he spoke up against his wife for my sake at the party, and that's why I felt like I owed him something. But now that I think about it, he just did the decent thing. Yes, Eric and I encouraged him, which is why he ended up telling everyone Vivian's secret, but that was still his decision. Neither Eric nor I could have forced him to do that, so ultimately it was on him, not us. Frankly, it's not like we made a deal with him that he would stand up for us, and then we would help him out. For him to make it seem that way is just strange. He wasn't doing us some huge favor by doing the right thing, like he's making it out to be. Even though these thoughts had crossed my mind earlier, I'm no longer going to feel guilty about standing up for myself and pushing back. As much as I hate to say it, I'm not going to be sympathetic toward Robert or try to fix his marriage for him. His wife is a terrible person, and I honestly think it's better for him if she stays away. I really don't think this separation will last long anyway, because Vivian hasn't worked a day in her life since having Eric. The only way she can maintain her standard of living is either by coming back to her husband or filing for divorce and waiting for alimony checks. I don't even understand what Robert is so worried about. He knows his wife is living off his money, even the hotel she's staying in, she's using his credit card to pay for everything. If he wants her to come back, he should just block the card instead of behaving so pathetically. Anyway, that's his choice. He can decide how to deal with his marital problems. All I'm saying is that neither Eric nor I are going to be part of it. Update 2. 1.5 weeks have passed since my last update. Before this, Robert had only been texting us, begging us to apologize to Vivian so she would come back. Since we eventually stopped responding to him, he decided to show up in person to speak with us. This happened about 3 days ago. When we let him in, it was clear he was extremely upset about everything. He looked unkempt and disheveled, and I actually felt bad for him, until he opened his mouth. To our surprise, he started yelling at us as soon as he sat down. He told us that he had stood up for us the day of the party, yet we didn't have enough gratitude to help him now. He was screaming that he had been suffering for so long because his wife refused to speak to him, yet the very people he had taken a stand for were so ungrateful they couldn't even respond to his texts. I didn't have anything to say during this tirade, but Eric got into a heated argument with his dad. He said everything I had been thinking, that Vivian not speaking to Robert wasn't our problem, and it was obviously just a power move to get everyone to apologize and bend to her will. He said it was insane that Robert was even considering entertaining this power trip she was on. Eric also told his dad that he'd had enough of the diplomacy. Robert could either be on our side or on his wife's side, and nobody was surprised when he told us he would obviously choose his wife's side no matter how she had behaved, because at the end of the day, he loved her and she loved him. Eric ended up telling him that Vivian didn't actually love him, she was the real gold digger in this situation, not me. He suggested that if his father didn't believe it, he should just try blocking the credit card she was using and see how quickly she ran back to him. At that point, I think Robert had had enough. He just walked out without another word. We haven't heard from him since, and this morning we realized he had blocked both our numbers and on all social media. There's not much we can do to help him if he wants to stay with a woman like that. That's his choice. We just don't want anything to do with either him or his wife anymore, and that's final. We're done. Update 3: It's been about 2 months since our anniversary party, and Eric and I have had absolutely no contact with his parents since my last update, which was around 3 or 4 weeks ago. Until a couple of days ago, we didn't even know what they were up to, but they decided to inform us themselves. Robert unblocked Eric and sent him a lengthy message saying he had finally reunited with his wife, and now he could see why she had never approved of me. He said he had been a fool to ever stand up for me. He went on to say that Vivian had been right in calling me lower-class trash because that's exactly what I was, and I had proven it by deserting him and choosing not to apologize to Vivian, even though I knew it would cost Robert his marriage, even after he had stood up for me at the party and tried to be a good person. Clearly, according to him, I didn't value that, which just went to show I was somebody who would only use people as long as it was convenient, typical of lower-class folks like me. He said he was glad he had finally reconciled with his wife and realized that I had corrupted Eric as well, and now he wanted nothing to do with either of us. He warned Eric that I would be done with him as soon as I had exhausted all his money and resources and moved on to my next victim. Then Eric would come crawling back to them, and they would accept him because he was their only son, but he needed to know what a huge mistake he had made. They even had a specific message for me, saying I had tried my hardest to break up their marriage and ruin Vivian's life just because I was upset that she had seen right through me and my act from the beginning. But I had failed, and I was never going to be able to hold on to Eric because ultimately, someday he would go back to his parents and realize what kind of person I actually was. The whole message was ridiculous, and Eric and I didn't pay any attention to it. We decided to ignore it and move on with our lives. As for who is going to come crawling back to whom, we'll see when we announce our pregnancy, since we've decided to start trying for a baby. It will be their loss anyway, because Eric and I love each other, and after our baby arrives, they're going to miss out on being grandparents. I'm going to make sure they are nowhere near me or my child. All I need is Eric and my parents by my side, and as long as I have that, Robert and Vivian can deal with the consequences of their own actions for all I care.